And that brings us to tonight's guest speaker. Our special guest speaker tonight, Dr. Steve Noll, is a master lecturer in the history department at the University of Florida. Dr. Noll holds a PhD from the University of Florida. He taught special education in Alachua County Public Schools for 28 years before moving back over to UF full-time in 2004. Dr. Noll has published 3 books, including Ditch of Dreams, The Cross-Florida Barge Canal, and The Struggle for Florida's Future. Tonight, he's here to tell us a little bit more about this interesting chapter in Florida's history. It's with great pleasure that I welcome Dr. Steve Noll.
Thank you very much, Zach. Good to be here. Very excited to be here with 8,000 people who are in attendance, mostly in their pajamas, but that's okay. And I'm here to talk tonight about Ditch of Dreams, the Cross-Florida Barge Canal and the struggle for Florida's future. And I've got my neighbor putting his lights right into my house, so just bear with me. So this book comes out of a long-term collaboration with Dave Tegeter, who teaches at Santa Fe College here in Gainesville, and started out as a project through the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, working with the people who are involved with the Cross-Florida Greenway. And it's been a long time that we've been working on this book and this story. And the crazy thing is the story never ends, which I think is one of the really telling points about this discussion. It isn't ended yet. And so therefore there's no kind of final conclusion as to what's going to happen, which I think is really positive and wonderful, or positive and problematic. So what is the Cross-Florida Barge Canal? And for me, the interesting thing is I've given this talk around the state, from South Florida to West Florida to Southeast Florida to Northwest Florida to Central Florida, all over the state. And significant numbers of individuals who live in Florida have never heard of this thing. And this is an attempt to bisect the state of Florida with a canal. Twice started, twice stopped. Once started and stopped in the 1930s. Once started again in the 1960s and stopped in the early 1970s. And its remains are still around. It is a story about liberalism. It's a story about citizen activism. It's a story about what people think Florida's future should be like. This is a canal that was going to be started on the West Coast near Yankeetown, travel along the Lakuchi River, and then across the state, bisecting it south of Ocala in Marion County, then along the Ocklawaha River, then along the St. Johns River to Jacksonville and out into the Atlantic Ocean. It was a dream that had been thought of from territorial times in the 1820s through early statehood before the Civil War till times after the Civil War, then in the 19-teens and 20s, finally started, stopped. No one thought it was going to start again, restarted. No one thought it was going to be stopped again. And so this scar across the land, and you can see here in this Google Earth picture, this is where the canal is. The remnants of the canal, which is now the Marjorie Harris Carr Cross-Florida Greenway, which is one of the great ironies of this story. And this story is all about irony. In fact, when we were writing the book, our editor said, you use the word irony too much. And we both said, I don't think we use the word irony enough, because this story is full of ironies. And the irony is this would have been an industrial waterway across the state of Florida that is now turned into a 107-mile swath of green that is a buffer and barrier from Orlando's sprawling metropolis heading inexorably north, and from Ocala's sprawl heading south. And this greenway is this wonderful swath of green that never would have been there without the canal. Okay, so this is what the canal still looks like today on the west side, looking west from Inglis Lock towards the Gulf of Mexico. The canal was to have five locks and 4 dams, all of which were not built. We'll get into this, but this is what it looks looking west from Inglis Lock in Citrus County towards the Gulf of Mexico. There today, but not used. This is what the canal looks like on the east side. This is the canal traversing from the St. Johns River westward to that body of water in the background. And the road that you see there is State Road 19. And 19 is a big number because in this picture, this is taken right by US 19 on the west coast. So we got US 19 on the west coast, which goes over the canal, and State Road 19 on the east side, which goes over the canal just south of Palatka. That large body of water in the back is the bone of contention that still exists over the canal's remnants. It is called, and as I talked in all my classes at UF, #words matter. It is called Lake Ocklawaha. It is called Rodman Reservoir. It is called Rodman Pool. It is called the impoundment. And depending on whether you want the thing to be there, to go away, whether you think it should be around, whether you think it should be gone tomorrow, that's how you call that lake, that impoundment, that reservoir. So that body of water still is the major issue regarding the canal today. The canal is stopped, but its remnants are there, and the major concern is this body of water that is still there on the Ocklawaha River. And this is the Ocklawaha River. This is the major argument for stopping the canal. This is the center of opposition to having the canal built. And in order to look at what we're doing, we're going to go back in time into the mid-19th century, just after the Civil War, a time of industrialization and urbanization, when Florida still has a population smaller than any other state in the South, when Florida is at some level a subtropical wilderness, pretty much uninhabited by not very many people at all. And the Ocklawaha River is this wonderful, beautiful, canopied serpentine river that will be the centerpiece of Florida's tourist attractions in the late 19th century. The Ocklawaha River flows northward and then a little westward into the St. Johns, which also flows northward. It starts in central Florida, and its flow is increased by almost half from the flow from the Silver River in Marion County, which enters the Ocklawaha today just south of what is State Road 40. And the Silver River comes out of, and you probably hear this next week with Dr. Bob Knight, out of Silver Springs, the largest and most beautiful first magnitude spring in the center of north central Florida's Springs country. It is a place that Northerners were enchanted with throughout much of the late 19th century. And this enchantment leads to the discovery of the Ocklawaha as this tourist attraction. So understand that at this point in the late 19th century, the center of Florida tourism is ironically Palatka, Florida. Okay, think about that. Today, if you're living in Gainesville, Palatka is a place you have to go through to get to the beach. And the object is to get through Palatka as fast as possible, right? Because there's not much there. But in the late 19th century, because Palatka is just north of where the St. Johns, where the Ocklawaha enters the St. Johns, it's right on the river. It is the center of tourism. And that tourism is exploited by, of course, a northern entrepreneur, Hubbard Hart. And Hubbard Hart starts his eponymously named Hart Line steamship lines in the time period right after the Civil War. From 1869 to 1919, Hart's boats ply the St. Johns and the Ocklawaha back and forth to Silver Springs, a 3-day trip. It's an overnight trip. And thousands of tourists come from the north, mostly wealthy tourists, mostly urban tourists looking to escape the ills of the urban environment, looking to get back to nature. And Florida has that nature in large quantities. This beautiful river, this river that Hart says is like the Nile. He's never been to the Nile. He has no idea. Like Africa, like South America. He's never been to Africa. He's never been to South America, but it sounds exotic. And Florida seems to be exotic. So, here's the Hart line, connecting to larger steamship lines that traveled to Jacksonville and then down to Palatka, and incorporated in 1901, established in 1860. He's got this amazing tourist travel place. And the river itself is not just a way to get to Silver Springs. Silver Springs is the destination. Silver Springs is where the glass bottom boat was invented in 1879, so people could glide over the springs and see the beauty of it. The river is as much a tourist attraction as the springs themselves. And it's only during the winter that this occurs. So Hart's line is only open from November until early April, because we all know without air conditioning, it's just too damn hot in Florida. So he's got to make all his money during the winter season. And we all know too, it gets dark early in Florida. So what happens at night? Well, the internet on the boat's down all the time. I'm sorry, I don't know why. It's always down. So what do? Well, they put huge cauldrons of pitch pine on the sides, on the top of the boat, and light them every night. And they illuminate the river, they illuminate the overhanging foliage above, and it creates, in the words of one of the passengers, Harriet Beecher Stowe, this fairyland. And people write back, this is just marvelous. The day on the Ocklawaha is beautiful, but the night is remarkable. The grand illumination, as it's called. And when people talk about their trip, they talk about the river, they talk about the springs, but they also talk about the grand illumination along the river. And you can see, leave from Palatka, right? Palatka down to the springs and back. And, here's another. This is one of Hart's boats, of course, named after Osceola. We removed the Native Americans from this space. They lived along in this river valley, but we named the boat after them. But this is an advertisement from a northern newspaper, a lithograph. And you can see, interesting, the alligator in the front of the boat is as big as the boat itself. And this is a time period in the late 19th century. Dinosaurs were just discovered, dinosaur bones. And so the alligators are seen as this kind of living dinosaur, this kind of throwback to these prehistoric times. And the vast majority of people in Northeast New York, Philadelphia, Boston, Baltimore, they've never seen these things. And these things are exotic, amazing, wonderful creatures. And the Ocklawaha Valley is rife with alligators. When Harriet Beecher Stowe travels in the 1870s, she writes and says, I saw thousands of alligators. You could walk across the river on them. There were so many. And because the river is so narrow and twisty and turny, specialized boats have to be developed with the paddle wheel protected in the back, because the boats often go from bank to bank to bank, which would basically destroy either a side wheeler or a stern wheeler. This is a boat called the Metamora, on one of the few lines which attempted to compete with Hart's lines on the Ocklawaha. The Lucas boat, within 5 years, this boat will be purchased by Hart, driving Lucas out of business. Okay, so attempted opportunities for competition. Not really. Hart pretty much has a monopoly in the river. You can see in the back, Metamora out of Palatka. So Palatka as the main place where these boats start and stop. And this is ecotourism, 19th century style. These people come down here to see the foliage, to see the birds, to see the alligators. But it is ecotourism, 19th century style. See the alligators, shoot the alligators. Pick up the alligators, take the alligators, stuff the alligators, bring them home to the club in New York and put them up there. So when Harriet Beecher Stowe rides on Hart's boats in the 1880s, just 10 years after she writes about how many alligators there are, she writes, there are only hundreds here. The numbers have been reduced dramatically. And so even though Hart is using this river as a tourist attraction, as a place that people can commune with nature, he is changing it rather dramatically just by his tourist opportunities. And Hart's an entrepreneur, and entrepreneurs are designed for one thing: to make money, right? So he has an orange grove along the St. Johns River, and he uses his boats as not just boats to travel, to move tourists back and forth in the river, but as vehicles of commerce. So along the river, which has absolutely no other way, the people who live in the river valley have really no other way to get to the rest of the world except by the river. The roads are non-existent. There are no railroads yet into this interior part of Florida until the 1890s. So Hart's boats provide opportunity for these people to be connected to the market. So you may have a nice state house on the second floor of the Tuscaloosa here, but you may be next to a bale of cotton which is being shipped out, or a bolt of cloth which is being shipped in. So all along the Ocklawaha are these steamboat landings in which the boat stops. Tourists don't get off, but locals can pick up things and drop things off. This is also the mail, right? So people get their mail and deliver and send their mail out by Hart's boats. And Hart also is significantly responsible for changing the foliage of the valley, the Ocklawaha River Valley itself. First growth forests are large cypress trees. The cypress trees are logged out throughout much of the 19th century by corporations associated with Hart. You can see here these guys taking down the cypress trees. Cypress is an incredibly rot-resistant wood, so it is incredibly in demand throughout much of the late 19th century. So what do? We cut down these trees. Hard to get them out. We can't ship them out by truck, can't ship them out by rail. There are no roads. So what do? We put them in huge log rafts, which are then floated down the Ocklawaha, which at some level is up the Ocklawaha, right, because it flows north, to Walaka, where it goes into the St. Johns, then up the St. Johns, which really is down the St. Johns, right, and to Palatka, where by 1919, the lumber mill in Palatka is the largest lumber mill of milling cypress in the world. Okay, so because this is Florida, the people who work on these boats, which is incredibly tough, these log rafts, incredibly tough, hard work, segregated work. So there will be rafts that have housing for whites. There will be log rafts that have housing for blacks. And if you want to read about life on these log rafts and the logging industry in general, Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings, who writes The Yearling, who writes Cross Creek, who writes Cross Creek Cookery, has a book which at some levels out of print. I think it's her best novel. It's called South Moon Under. And in there, she's got a couple chapters on life along the river as a lumberer, taking these logs down to the E.O. Wilson lumber mill in Palatka. And while that is happening on the East Coast, on the east side, on the Ocklawaha side, and after Hart's boats go out of business in 1919, the river kind of falls asleep, okay? People still come to Silver Springs, but they come to Silver Springs by train or by car. And Silver Springs becomes much more connected to Ocala than it does to Palatka by the river. And so the Ocklawaha kind of goes back into reinventing itself as a more natural stream. On the west side, the Lakuchi undergoes a very different experience in the late 19th century. This is phosphate mining. Phosphate discovered in southwest Marion County in the 1880s by a man named Albertus Vogt, who becomes known as the Duke of Denellen, and Denellen, Florida becomes the phosphate capital of Florida. Now, what do we use phosphate for? Well, we can use it for gunpowder, which is used in World War I, but certainly more importantly, it's used for fertilizer. And it becomes a large extractive industry in this sector along the Withlacoochee River from the 1880s into the time period from World War I. Really tough work. People who work on this are often convict leased laborers, oftentimes ex-slaves, freedmen. Very difficult work. First done here, as you can see, by hand, by pick and shovel, digging the phosphate out. But now by 1900, with huge huge dredges digging it out of the rivers. And you can see the picture in the lower right, the train and the barge both carrying phosphate to the coastline. So the Lakuchi River is changed rather dramatically during this time period, not nearly as natural as the river on the other side, the Ocklawaha. This stuff is dumped out to a port that is developed on the west coast of Florida that is now a ghost town, Port Ingles, Florida. Okay, you can see this place looks like a bustling port. And 110 years ago, it would have been a bustling port, as dozens of ships load up phosphate to take off. That's basically all that's unloaded, right? They come here empty, they load up with phosphate, they go away, and they go to other ports in Florida. They go to New Orleans. They go around the state to the East Coast. They go to Central and South America and to Europe with this cargo of phosphate. This is more there, and the map on the lower right-hand corner is a map of what Port Ingles looked like in 1900. And number 9, which is you can see is right here. This is where the customs house was, okay? And in order to have a customs house, this is where exports and imports are loaded in by the United States Customs Service to determine whether people are paying the correct taxes. In order to have this, this has to be a really large place of entry and exit, and that's what this place is. Right now, this place is completely gone. Right. And I've been there. It is being reclaimed. There's nothing there, and within 10 years, it might be underneath the water with sea level rise. So those are the 2 rivers that will make up what this canal is. So we've got this stuff, but we've got significant numbers of Floridians who are interested in building a canal using maybe these rivers, using other rivers. And so throughout the time from when Florida becomes a territory in 1821 until the 1930s, the Army Corps of Engineers and other government organizations are involved in dozens of surveys across the state to determine the efficacy of building a canal. Why? It will save time around the peninsula, 3.5 days connecting the Mississippi River and its Gulf of Mexico waterborne traffic to the Atlantic and New York and its waterborne traffic. Not only saving time, but concerns about pirates and what are called wreckers around Key West, and concerned about crashing against the against the coral reefs in the Florida Straits. So this canal, thought about in the time period of originally the 1820s, Erie canal booms all the way. People are looking at canals all over the state. Where can they do it? And they build lines. The Army Corps of Engineers slogs through the mud, and much of the topographical maps of Florida that are developed by these Corps of Engineers soldiers looking for places where the canal could be built. And they come up with places all the way from the St. Mary's River down to across Lake Okeechobee in the Everglades. So these guys are engineers, and we all know what engineers can do. Anything, right? Engineers can do anything as long as you tell them they can do it. So this is from DuBose Review, which is one of the leading economic journals in the South. And they hate the federal government because the federal government's going to take their slaves away, right? But they love the federal government because the federal government's going to be the only entity that can give enough money to build this canal. So and here's this irony. DuBose Review, which on page 2 might be saying, get out of our lives, federal government, don't take our slaves. But on page 3, they're going to be saying, federal government, come and give us our money so that we can build this canal across the state of Florida. So all these engineers say, yes, we can build it. But they say, we can build it, but here's the line that's the best part. A ship canal across Florida is impracticable. That's just a great 19th century word. So when we're writing the book, we put that word in there, and the editor says, that's not a word. So, well, talk to the people in the 19th century because that's their word, right? So the engineers say, we can build it, right? Because we can do anything. That's what engineers do, right? You want us to build an electric car? We can do it. You want us to build a gas car? We can do it. But it's impractical. It's not going to be worth the investment of money. So this thing lies dormant. People pushed for it throughout much of the 19th century. Periodically, Florida's senators and congressmen pushed for this in the United States Congress. Josiah T. Wallace, Florida's first Black congressman, is pushing for this in the 1870s. When he's pushed out of office, replaced by Jim Crow, white supremacist Democrats, they push for it, okay? So it's a bipartisan issue, but nothing happens. It's pushed for it even more with the building of the Panama Canal in the first 2 decades of the 20th century, okay? But nothing happens until the 1930s. And then there's a new reason for building this canal. The reasons were, save time, make Florida a destination, make Florida a center of trade along the East Coast. Now we've got a new reason, a new rationale, a new function. We can build these jobs to put men to work, right? There's 30% unemployment, 45 to 50% underemployment. People are hurting. We need jobs. And what better job than to build this canal? So in 1935, President Roosevelt, by executive action, authorizes the building of a canal across the state along the path of one of the survey routes surveyed by the Army Corps of Engineers. And Army Corps of Engineers don't give sexy names. This is Route 13B, as bureaucratic a name as you can get. So Route 13B is going to be along the Lakuchi River, across the state south of Ocala, along the Ocklawaha, and along the St. John's out. It's going to be dug, as you can see in this picture, it's going to be dug out into the Gulf of Mexico. It's going to be dug out into the Atlantic. The St. John's is going to be widened and deepened, and the Ocklawaha is going to be straightened as well. This is what it's going to look like. You can see big doings. This is the Washington Post. Okay, this is not just in Joe Schmo's local paper, right? This is the Washington Post. You can see what it's going to look like. Ocean-going vessels. It's going to be a ship canal. All right, it's going to be a ship canal, 40 feet deep, 200 feet wide. Ocean-going vessels are going to be able to traverse the state of Florida. And the assumption is at the rate of 1 ship per day is going to cross the state and is going to make Ocala the center of inland commerce and trade throughout the nation. Ocala boosters are pointing out that this will make Ocala the busiest inland port in the entire United States. Okay? And so in August of 1935, FDR allocates $5 million out of his executive budget to build this canal. It's only a down payment. The assumption is it's going to cost $40 million, which is unbelievable in the midst of the Great Depression. And in September, the next month, 5,000 men descend on what is known as Camp Roosevelt, a newly established base south of Ocala, along the Dixie Highway, which is now US 441, where this will be the base from which these workers will be sent out to dig the canal, clear the land and dig the canal. So you can see all these guys, that's what they're doing. Ocala's excited. Ocala is excited. In that month of September, Ocala issues 12 liquor licenses. So they are waiting. The assumption is these guys are here, they're getting paid, they'll spend Saturday night in the bars in Ocala. They're concerned too about women of the night coming in here and plying their trade. So we have vice police coming down to make sure that that doesn't happen. And this is Camp Roosevelt. This is the house of the leading engineers. These houses are still in existence south of Ocala. When the canal is stopped, they get turned over to various New Deal agencies, the National Youth Administration. They serve as barracks for training for World War II soldiers. After the war, they are used for housing for young UF students who are at UF under the GI Bill. They live south of Ocala. They live in places like this. They got on a bus every day, drive up to Gainesville, go to college, come back. So these are houses that were built for the people who are working on the canal. And this is what they're doing. They're clearing the land. South of Ocala is where they're going to start. And they're going to dig the ditch, but they're also going to clear the land. And they're going to clear the land inefficiently. with mules and men. And the inefficiency is because, sure, they have machinery, and machinery is used, as you'll see in a minute. But mules and men are designed because that way more people can work, okay? If we have one person working a machine as opposed to 40 people doing it by hand, we're going to have the 40 people doing it by hand because that puts more people to work. And they quickly change the geography, the topography, the land of Southwest Marion County significantly. And using machinery as well, digging out, and you can see this is what this looks like in the early winter of 1936. They're working extraordinarily hard, and the difference between what this looks like and what Hart's vision of Florida along the Ocklawaha looks like tells us that maybe there are some people who are beginning to think that this is not something that we want here in the state. This is not the tourist attraction of the Ocklawaha Valley. This looks like a desert, right? And other people are saying it may look like a desert, but it's going to be a desert that's going to bring jobs as this beautiful transportation network is going to be right here in Central Florida. And then we've got this. So I was in the archives one day at the University of Florida looking at newspaper microfilm, and I come across this article in the New York Times, and I nearly fell out of my chair. It was unbelievable. So what the heck's going on here? Well, labor issues affect Florida just like they affect the northern industrial places during the Great Depression. And the assumption is workers should just be damn happy to have a job, right? They were out of work. They should be happy just to have a job, which means they are ripe for getting underpaid, overworked in really tough working conditions. And workers here begin to think, you know, I'm being taken advantage of. They understand that I am desperate, but that doesn't mean that I have to put my life in danger for my work. So they begin to think about organizing as a union. And George Timmerman, not George Zimmerman, but George Timmerman, comes down to Florida to help organize these workers as a union shop. And guess what? Florida is not very conducive to union organizing. And George Timmerman is found in the woods near Ocala, tied to a cross, lips sewn shut, okay? Spiked to a cross. He lives. He gets out of here and says, guess what? You can organize all the unions you want in Florida, but I'm not going to be a part of this. I'm out of here. And with Timmerman's disappearance, and he disappears from the record. We tried to find what happened to George Timmerman. He just said, I'm the hell out of this place. So he leaves. And with that, any opportunity for a union organization on the canal is gone. Now, this looks pretty damn bad, doesn't it, right? I mean, people see this and say, oh my God, what the heck's going on in Florida? A very different vision of what it's like in the Ocala pit, okay? Officers believe here cross case is a fake, okay? And hard to see what this is, but basically they say that Timmerman did it to himself to raise publicity and get people to understand that he is having a carnival here. And what better way to have a carnival than to be a human pincushion? So just think about that. Think about which vision you think is the more correct one. But with that, all possibility of union activism and workers slowing down the building is gone. So the assumption is we're golden, we're good here, right? We're going to go on and build this 40-foot deep ditch. But this is from the New York Times, early in 1936. Okay? Florida Canal still raises ire. What's going on here? Why? Why are people upset? It has nothing to do with Timmerman. People don't care about workers, right? Nah. It has to do with what the canal is going to do. 40 feet deep. And if I was talking to you face to face, I would ask this question. What happens when you dig a ditch 40 feet deep into Florida? I know, you hit the Floridan aquifer, right? You hit the aquifer. And this canal would have hit the aquifer and would have associated it with one of the worst things that can happen, saltwater intrusion, because there's no dikes, there's no dams, there's no locks, there's no levees. It's just a ditch straight across the state, okay? Connecting, leaching into the aquifer. And who's getting angry? Well, first of all, people who think that Florida should be a natural tourist attraction. So those people around Silver Springs, but their voice is not that important. The real important people are the people who run Florida's largest industry in the 1930s, and that's agriculture. So people who grow citrus, people who grow vegetables start to raise hell about this canal and what it's going to do to them. It's not going to improve Florida's economy. It's going to destroy Florida's economy because it's going to destroy opportunities to grow vegetables and fruit. And so the mayor of Sanford sends boxes of lettuce to Congress. Boxes of celery. Sanford is the celery city. And Floridians begin to raise questions about whether this canal is worth it. And Northerners begin to raise questions about whether the price tag is going to be worth it. Because, the assumption was $5 million were put down. FDR said it's going to cost 40. Now estimates are saying it's going to cost more than that, 50 million, 60 million, no one's sure, like money being thrown down a rat hole. And FDR, consummate politician that he is, says, guess what? I'm not going to put my political capital behind something that the state isn't completely behind. I put money from my executive budget in. Now it's up to Congress. So if you guys want to continue building this canal, you've got to allocate money yourself. And in the summer of 1936, Congress votes to continue funding the canal. It loses by 1 vote. The canal is dead. This is left. These are bridge stanchions for where the Dixie Highway is going to cross over the canal south of Ocala. The scaffolding is pulled off them. The stanchions are left there to be overcome by the Florida foliage. And all that's left of the canal is this ditch half finished, right? The dredges are gone. The bulldozers are gone. All those workers who were paid to build this thing, they're gone too. And that's the end of the story. So I'm done. No. Those people who wanted the canal feel that they have been betrayed. We started it, we had it, and now it's stopped. Let's try and figure out ways to get it built. Okay, so they do 2 things. Number 1, they reconfigure the canal along the same path, Route 13B. Let's get with the Army Corps of Engineers and let's redesign it as a barge canal. Right? Less wide and only 12 feet deep. And if it's 12 feet deep, it doesn't interfere with the aquifer. If it doesn't interfere with the aquifer, we don't affect the farmers. If we don't affect the farmers, they cannot be upset about us building it. So this redesign, and now not just a cut, but with locks and dams to mark the changing topography and height of Florida. I mean, not that high, but certainly higher than just cutting, right? So we're going to redefine it. We're going to make it smaller, and we're going to put locks and dams. That's going to assuage the critics. And then we do what Americans always do. When we got a problem, we tie it to national defense. So the assumption is that we are going to utilize this canal to have a protective waterway for oil tankers from the oil fields. Most of our oil at this point is got from the oil fields of Texas and Oklahoma to the refineries of New York and New Jersey. Right? Now those ships have to go around the Gulf of Mexico. Through the Gulf of Mexico, around the peninsula of Florida, up the east coast of Florida, and they will be vulnerable to enemy submarines, right? This is the argument raised in the late 1930s into the early 1940s. This is an abstract argument until December 7th, 1941, when the United States enters World War I, and early 1942, when the United States is at war with Germany as well. In April of 1942, those ideas come to fruition. An oil tanker on its maiden voyage, carrying oil from Galveston to Baltimore, crude oil that needs to be refined, is sunk off Jacksonville Beach by the U-boat 123. 19 American sailors are killed. 400,000 gallons of crude oil is dumped into the Atlantic Ocean. And all those supporters of the canal say, we told you, if the canal had been built, this wouldn't have happened. 3 months later, Congress authorizes the passage and the building of the Cross-Florida Barge Canal. People from Ocala are happy. People from Jacksonville are happy. They're excited. The canal is going to be built. They authorize it, but they don't allocate funding. Way down the list of funding. We got a waterway. We got to build ships. We got to build planes. We have to build tanks. We have to get uniforms for the soldiers, right? We got to get guns. So no money is allocated. It's on the books, but no money is allocated. So without money allocation, it's not there. So war's over, that defense angle dies, right? So boosters, which is those people pushing for the canal, now have to come up with another rationale, right? How else are we going to convince Congress to pass money for the canal? Well, let's make Florida again the centerpiece of national commerce and waterborne trade. And Dave Tegeter and I call this the spaghettiization of Florida. The Cross-Florida Barge Canal is going to be the missing link with this wonderfully complex system of canals throughout the state of Florida, tying it to the traffic, waterborne traffic in the Gulf and waterborne traffic in the Gulf of in the Atlantic Ocean. And certainly it's a time of unbridled liberalism. Liberalism, government can do anything, right? Government can do anything. And we got lots of money, right? This is World War II. After World War II, the United States coming out of this good. We got lots and lots of money, and we can do anything. We won the war, negating the fact that the Soviets really put in lots of effort and significant casualties. But we won the war, and everybody else is devastated. Russians are devastated. Japanese are devastated. Europe's devastated. The United States comes out of this looking good. So we can do whatever we want. And this is just a great cartoon. This is what happens in the 1950s and 60s in Florida. The Army Corps of Engineers, Florida's their sandbox. They can rework Florida. The Central and South Florida Flood Control Project allows the building of projects in the Everglades, along the East Coast from Palm Beach County south. Okay, all those dreams of people like Hamilton Diston, of people like Napoleon Bonaparte Broward. The Corps does it, and the Corps is going to be instrumental in trying to tie the Barge Canal to this larger picture of reworking Florida and making the land livable. And finally, in 1963, Florida politicians push it through Congress. And again, here's a slide that I would ask who these people are. The guy with the cigarette and the hat, that's George Smathers, United States Senator, good friend of the president. Okay, he's at Kennedy, he's in Kennedy's wedding. The guy in the middle is Florida Governor Ferris Bryant, and not coincidentally, Ferris Bryant's from Ocala, right? Pushing for this. And the guy in the corner is Bob Sykes, the he-coon. Bob Sykes from the Panhandle. I hate the government. I'm a small government guy. I hate it. I hate the government. Well, guess what? He loves the government because North Panhandle, Florida, what's their industry based on? The military. Why are they there? Because Bob Sykes brings home the bacon. So these three guys push and bring home the bacon. And in November 1963, Congress finally allocates $5 million to build the Cross-Florida Barge Canal. Again, this is just a down payment. The assumption is it's going to cost $70 million. And we're not ever sure how much it was ever going to cost. But this is a down payment. Not a great month, right? And many of you are old enough to remember what happened in November 1963. Kennedy is assassinated, and Lyndon Johnson takes over the nation, civil rights, Vietnam, but also this project. And here it is, surprise package from Washington. Money for the Cross-Florida Barge Canal. Again, not coincidentally, that money provided by the Democratic Congress, by the Democratic president, from Johnson's budget. We're going to build this thing, right? And you can see it, right? $4 million Cross-Florida Barge Canal, $13.5 million Central and South Florida flood control, right? All tied together. And in February of 1964, Lyndon Johnson comes to Palatka. It is the highlight of Palatka's career as a city for the groundbreaking of the Cross-Florida Barge Canal. 20,000 people on a cold day in February, right? It doesn't get above 50 degrees, go into this large field south of Palatka And Johnson is there along with everybody, his wife, the governor, there's Governor Bryant, there's Bob Sykes, the entire cabinet, the entire Florida congressional delegation are there. Johnson pushes a button, boom, the canal is started again. And there's the crowd. And we have interviewed people who were there, very excited. They got out of school that day. They bussed all the school children from Palatka to be there. I talked to people who were in the marching band, and some kid had a big sign, Barge Canal bigger than the Beatles, because if you remember, February 1964 was when Ed Sullivan had the Beatles on for the first time. This is a big deal, folks. We're going to put North Central Florida on the map. We're going to take it out of its economic malaise and turn it into this great place where we have jobs, good jobs, and economic growth and development, right? This is from the Ocala paper. Dirt turned on the Barge Canal, thousands go up. You can see tying it to what happened in 1935, right? Thousands on hand for the groundbreaking event. Reminders of the past. You can see Camp Roosevelt, the picture right there, right? You can see the picture of Camp Roosevelt. This is from the Palatka paper. Rains came, but so did President Johnson. 10,000 people, right? You can see the explosion. And this is a great story. When you have great stories, and the big picture of the Barge Canal is great, but the great little stories. The Army Corps of Engineers understand that if Johnson pushes the button on the dirt, it's just going to make a little explosion. They want a big ass explosion so everybody can see it, so it looks great. So they trucked in tons of peat moss so that when the explosion goes up, it goes way high in the air and people can say, oh my Lord, that's amazing. So now it's going to be built, right? And boy, we just are ready to go, right? The time allotted here, they go, here's Johnson, here's Bryant, they're going to dig, right? They're digging, and here we go. Holiday Inn, welcome. Floridians are excited. This is progress. This is progress, right? Liberalism, progress, economic growth, economic gain, economic development, and we're going to do it quickly. We're not concerned about jobs here. We're concerned about getting this thing done, right? So big dredges, big bulldozers, big machines cutting through the land to build this canal, right? And looks like everything is going to be great. And then there's Marjorie Carr, Marjorie Harris Carr, Our Lady of the River, Our Lady of the Ocklawaha. In this picture, she looks like she's worshiping in a cathedral of the trees in the Ocklawaha. So who is this woman? Well, she's a resident of Southwest Florida, Bonita Springs, when it was a frontier area, rode horses, rode horseback, bareback, goes to school at Florida State College for women because she can't go to UF because it's all men. Biologist, Phi Beta Kappa, brilliant scholar, gets a job at the federal fish hatchery in Walaka along the St. Johns River, marries UF biologist Archie Carr, and they become this power biology couple. Carr can't get a job because she's a woman. So she becomes Carr's supporter. Carr is known for being the man who discovers that sea turtles go back to the same beach year after year. He is a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant scientist. I would argue that she is maybe as brilliant, if not more, than he is. And she becomes associated with the University of Florida community. She becomes an activist for conservation. She helps protect Lake Alice on the university campus. She helps protect Payne's Prairie, this beautiful, wonderful natural area south of Gainesville, between Gainesville and Ocala. But she finds her calling in protecting the Ocklawaha River from the Cross Florida Barge Canal, which is going to go right through there. And even before the money is allocated in 1962, there is a meeting at P.K. Young School in Gainesville at the auditorium with, will the Ocklawaha be destroyed? And Army Corps of Engineers guys go there and they give the party line, and they figure the crowd's just going to ask nice questions. But Carr's there, along with David Anthony, professor of biochemistry. And they start asking really pointed questions. And these Army Corps guys have no idea how to answer. Carr and Anthony win the day, but all the political elements are aligned against them. The federal government, the state government, the Army Corps of Engineers, huge big business, okay? So, these guys are voices in the wilderness, but they ask questions like this: health questions. What's it going to do to our health? Conservation. What's it going to do to Florida? And money. How much is it going to cost? And is it even worth it to build this thing? And certainly they utilize the ideas and beliefs of great political cartoonists like Don Addis, who writes first for the Florida Alligator at the University of Florida, and then for the St. Pete Times. And one thing I tell my students all the time, one thing you really, really, really miss about newspapers are political cartoons. And you can really tell the story of this argument through political cartoons. So Carr and people like David Anthony and people like Bill Partington from Winter Park and Margie Beeling from Ocala start asking these questions. And they're pretty much dismissed. Carr is dismissed as, quote, a mere Micanopy housewife. Micanopy being this small town just south of Gainesville. And she plays that roll to the hill. Oh, I'm this poor woman. Oh, I need help. I need. And she's as smart as a whip. I mean, she's playing these Army guys like a fiddle. And she uses this as her best ally. This is this machine developed to destroy the Ocklawaha River Valley so that it can be designed for the canal itself. This crusher, this gigantic multi-engine amphibious vehicle designed to crush 1 acre of forest an hour, right? And it's called this engineering marvel. And Carr and her allies take people down to the Ocklawaha Valley to watch the crusher in action as it's mowing down the forest. And they show them pictures of things like this. This is what Hubbard Hart's River looks like after the crusher gets through. This is going to be the area that is going to be utilized for the gigantic lake behind the dam that will be Lake Ocklawaha, that will be the Rodman Reservoir. And this machine just mows down the trees, puts them into the ground, right? And because they are so far from any roads, these trees are just left there. And in 1968, when the dam across the river is completed, the water is behind it, guess what happens? These trees that have been pushed down into the muck now underwater begin to pop up and pop up and pop up. And so we have these huge piles of logs, and we don't know what to do with them. And Carr brings people down to the river and shows them this and shows them this. Piles of logs piled up, the residue from the crusher, into huge piles that are then burned, right? And she says, what a colossal waste. What a colossal waste and what a colossal destruction of this beautiful natural river. For what? From a canal that she is saying and her allies are saying, including economists at UF, are saying it's economically not viable. It's too narrow, it's too small, barges aren't going to use it, it's already outdated, so it's a waste for nothing. Construction continues unabated. This is construction at the same time as the destruction along the river. This is the building of the lock on the east side. It will be the St. John's Lock, eventually called Buckman Lock after Henry Buckman of Jacksonville, a big supporter of the canal in the Florida legislature. So this is going on. And this is the first mile of the canal off of the St. Johns River, heading towards Rodman Reservoir. This is the St. John's here in the background. And this picture is on the cover of the Army Corps of Engineers 1968 annual report. Nationwide, not just Florida, nationwide. This is their signature project. Big word on the top, progress, with a particular punctuation mark, an exclamation point. Carr and her allies take this exact same picture and use the exact same word, progress, except they put a different punctuation mark, progress, question mark. This is what they are doing to our state. And while Carr uses this picture, Bill Partington, who is the head of Florida Audubon, uses this picture in many of his discussions about what the canal is doing to Florida. look at what this is doing to our state. Is this what you want Florida to look like? And there are people who say yes, because it brings jobs, it brings economic prosperity. And Partington and Carr say yes, but at what cost? And in 1968, in September, the Rodman Dam is finished, and the reservoir, the lake, Rodman Pond, Rodman Pool is complete. And this is going to be providing water for the canal. And so you can see what it looks like as this dam is now completed. And this is what it looks like. This is the dam that is built, right here. This is Rodman Reservoir. And you can see how big it is, 10,000 acres behind the dam. This is the Ocklawaha flowing north. There would have been another dam right here in Eureka, which was built but never connected. And the reservoir behind it would have stretched all the way to Solar Spring, would have been 1.5 times the size of Rodman, okay? This is the canal's path through the lake on towards the St. Johns River. This is Buckman Lock. That's the lock that you saw being built. This is that first mile right here that you saw in that other picture. This is the original course of the Ocklawaha River. You can still traverse this up to the dam, but 60%, 70% of the water of the Ocklawaha River flows now in this canal cut, as opposed to the Ocklawaha River itself. And this is State Road 19, that bridge that you saw earlier. That's this right here. So by 1969, this is Marjorie Carr with Governor Claude Kirk, Archie in the background, her husband. By 1969, the world has changed dramatically, a propitious moment for environmentalism. And at some point, something of an oxymoronic phrase at this point, bipartisan environmentalism. Richard Nixon, the president, does remarkable environmental things. Claude Kirk, a Republican governor of Florida, the first Republican governor in 100 years, does remarkable environmental things, appoints Nat Reed to be his environmental supporter, his environmental secretary. And Nat Reed, as we all know, is just this wonderful guy who is concerned unequivocally for Florida's environment. And Carr is now has the upper hand with the canal. The canal is moving along building, but the Army Corps of Engineers is under attack. The engineering marvel of the crusher is now seen as a destruction machine. Money that should have been going to the canal is going to Vietnam. In the late 60s and 1970s, Carr founds an organization called the Florida Defenders of the Environment, which is based upon 3 ways to stop the canal. Number 1 is science. And Carr, I mean, this ties into today. Carr says, just give them the facts, because people will listen to the facts. And she, along with the University of Florida scientists and economists, come out with among the first environmental impact statements ever. Environmental impact of the cross Florida Barge Canal on the Ocklawaha River Valley. And basically they say it's going to be completely destructive of this incredibly beautiful, treasured natural resource. So science is one wing of what Carr and her allies in Florida Defenders of the Environment do, science. The second thing is public relations, and Carr is a genius. Carr takes what is a local issue and makes it national. She gets an article published in, of all places, Reader's Digest in January of 1970. And you can see here, along with these great articles, the drug scene, birth control, Vietnam, welfare revolution, medical swindlers, and rape on the Ocklawaha. This is not about young college students being raped there. It's about a river being raped by the Army Corps of Engineers. And this reaches the homes of people from Tacoma, Washington to El Paso, Texas, puts it on the national stage. So those 2 things, but the most important thing is Florida Defenders of the Environment hook up with an organization from New York called the Environmental Defense Fund, led by a New York lawyer named Victor Yannicone. And Yannicone has a big sign on his desk, sue the bastards. And Carr takes that into consideration. We can't get anywhere fighting with the powers that be within government. We're gonna have to sue. And so in 1969, Carr and FDE sued the Army Corps of Engineers to stop the canal. And they sued the canal to be stopped on the grounds that it's destroying a precious natural resource, okay? This is not conservation anymore, it's preservation. We're going to preserve this river. We don't want to conserve it because those resources are important. This river is important by itself, for itself, and winds its way slowly through the courts. But by January of 1971, two amazing things happened. This is 50 years ago last month. President Nixon issues an executive order stopping the canal, and a federal judge also orders the halt. So again, the canal is stopped now for the second time. And Dave and I interviewed a guy who was working on the canal on the west side near Inglis. He said, yeah, I bought a case of beer, drove away and cursed Richard Nixon all the way north to get a construction job in New York. So it stopped, and that should be the end of the story, but it's not. Again, this thing continues. So the canal is over, never going to be started again. Basically, almost everybody, except for a few diehard believers in Jacksonville and maybe Ocala, think it's never going to be started again. So the question remains, what to do with the canal? It's about a third finished. What do we do with the land allocated for it? What do we do with this stuff that has been started that now is never going to be finished? So what do we do with all this stuff? So those arguments take forever, right? They take forever. Now here's, what do we do? Here's Don Addis again. We invested all this money, we should finish it. And Florida's saying no. But the next one is maybe the best. So this is Don Addis again. I'm just going to just sit here for a second and let you guys look at this. It's great. This is great, great, great. Okay. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to try to figure out what to do with the land that has been set aside for building the canal, which the canal has not yet been built on. So we're going to go back to the state. Is it going to go back to the original owners? Is it going to go back to the counties? Are the feds going to run it? So for 20 years, we have this contentious legal battle over what to do about the parts of the canal that were never built. And a judge says, this is the most contentious legal discussion that I have ever presided over. At one point, the Army Corps of Engineers is both a claimant, an appellant, and a defendant in the same case. So try and figure this out. It takes 20 years. And finally, in 1992, the Army Corps of Engineers transfers the Cross-Florida Barge Canal to the Florida Canal Authority, which will then become part of this Greenway. The assumption is we're turning it over to the state of Florida to make it into a linear park, the Cross-Florida Greenway, this amazing transition. So, I mean, everybody's pretty happy about that, but Carr's not completely happy because the residue of the dam and the reservoir are still there. The Ocklawaha is not flowing freely, and the dam is still up. So, how to restore the river? Carr and her advocates talk about restoring the Ocklawaha. Why? What do we do? Get the dam out of there. It's going to fix the river, make it better, make everything work well. But other groups fight against this, led by this guy, State Senator George Kirkpatrick. With his cigar in his mouth and his fishing pole in his hand, he becomes the defender of keeping the reservoir and the dam. So much so that in 1997, the legislature names Rodman Dam, which is holding back Rodman Reservoir, holding back Lake Ocklawaha, holding back the impoundment. They rename it after him. He's not even dead yet, okay? That same year, Carr dies, never to see her river flowing completely freely again. And the legislature, the same legislature that named the dam after Kirkpatrick, names the Greenway after Carr. It is now called, and still called, the Marjorie Harris Carr Cross-Florida Greenway. And this is George Kirkpatrick's organization, Save Rodman Reservoir, okay? And again, let's look at the words. It interestingly presages things that are going on today. Small but highly vocal minority of rich people supports many endangered plants. No one likes the Barge Canal, but it gave us this lake, and we love this lake. We love this lake for its bass fishing. So we've got these two groups fighting, and the dam is still up. Okay? Dam is still up even past the death of both of these people. Marjorie Carr dies in 1997. Kirkpatrick dies in 2003. They're both buried in the same cemetery in Gainesville. about 100 yards apart. Both of them were laid out their funerals in First Presbyterian Church in Gainesville. Again, irony of ironies, crazy, crazy stuff. When Carr's casket is taken out of the church to head towards Evergreen, Gainesville Sun has an article, mysteriously on the hearse appears a bumper sticker, free the Ocklawaha. 6 years later, when Kirkpatrick dies, same church, probably the same hearse. Kirkpatrick, not to be outdone, apparently the Gainesville Sun uses that same adjective again, mysteriously appears on the hearse. 2 bumper stickers, save Rodman Reservoir. So it continues. Every year it continues. And because the reservoir is an artificially maintained environment, it has to be maintained by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. So every 5 years, the level of the reservoir has to be lowered from 22 feet to 11 feet to allow all the detritus to get out of there and the bottom to breathe and to get rid of all the crap that's in the river. And when that happens, we see the residue of the crusher, this dead forest, all these trees, you can see they're all cut at the same height. That's the crusher, okay? That's the crusher. And these springs, this is Cannon Springs. When the reservoir is at its height of normal, 22 feet, these are underwater. And during the drawdown, you can see these amazing springs. And individuals now, this is another reason for keeping the dam down, for taking it down, that these springs can be utilized. This is artist Margaret Tolbert, who was instrumental in pushing to get the dam removed. And her movie called Lost Springs is this amazing chronicle of what happens when you go and visit these things during what's called the drawdown, when the engineers draw down the level of the river so it can breathe. And then it goes back up, but that's her pictures. Okay? But the Greenway is this amazing place. This is the remains of the Cross Florida Barge Canal, the Marjorie Harris Carr Cross Florida Greenway. If you go on I-75 south of Ocala, you'll pass this strange bridge. It's the land bridge. This is the bridge connecting both sides of the Greenway. Used for pedestrians, for bikers, for hikers, for equestrians, and for animals to cross from one side of the Greenway to the other. And this is the Greenway with Lakuchi Bay Trail to the Gulf of Mexico. This would have been the offloading point. This would have been among the most heavily industrialized places in all of Florida, an offloading place where these big ships would have unloaded their cargo to be transferred by barge to go across the river. Now it's an amazing place where you can ride your bike or hike to and see the sunset over the Gulf of Mexico from this, at some level, fairly natural environment. It's an amazing accomplishment. But the reservoir is still there. Every year, strange things happen in the legislature. 2009, people pushed to have a marina built on the reservoir. If the marina is going to be built on the reservoir is probably going to stay and the dam will stay. This was defeated by people who wanted the reservoir down and the dam destroyed, the river flowing freely. 3 years later, another lawsuit. And people who are in FDE, Carr now dead, but there are other people in FDE still, said, this is it. Now we're going to win. Now we're going to have the, I said, I'm not so sure. And so this is 9 years ago. Not much happened with this lawsuit, right? Stunned, okay? And then in 2015, 3 years later, the assumption is we're going to fix this again. Two of the most divergent groups on policy regarding water in the state of Florida come together and say, we have made an agreement. The St. John's River Keepers and the Jacksonville Chamber of Commerce. Oh my God, right? Two people, very different visions of Florida, environmentalism. They say, okay, mitigation. Jacksonville's port needs to be dredged. In order to do that, we have to mitigate part of the St. John's River Valley. Let's get rid of the dam. They both agree. Let's do that. And then they said, everybody said, this is it. If these two groups can get together to get the dam down, it's going to be down. But nobody asked the people in Palatka. They go crazy. We've been left out of this argument. Who are the people in Jacksonville to tell us we can't have our dam, we can't have our reservoir? Okay, and here we are. They weren't buying, right? And guess what? 2015, nothing happens with that. 2 years later, another lawsuit attempting to get the dam down on the grounds that it's destructive to the Ocklawaha River. Okay, guess what? Once again, Florida Defenders of the Environment say, this is it. This lawsuit has no possibility of not passing. This is 3.5 years ago. The dam is still there. Okay, the dam is still there. But other groups are moving to try and get it down in different ways. The Great Florida Riverway is this coalition of environmental groups and economic groups to say, Putnam County, understand that having the dam down with ecotourism and looking at the springs will be more financially beneficial to the county than a few bass boats. And certainly there's movement towards this because it's the 50th anniversary of when the canal was stopped. So last month, 2 articles in papers around the state, one by me in the Tampa Bay Times and one by Fred Hires in the Citrus County Chronicle, talk about 50th anniversary. And this would just be a really nice present to get the dam down the river to run freely again. So where are we? Oh, we still have those amazing bridge stanchions south of the sheriff's substation on US 441 in Ocala. You go back in the woods and it's incredible. Go there, see this. It's like Stonehenge. It's amazing. Okay. And first time I saw it, I thought they were from the 60s. No, they're from the 30s. Okay. Close to 100 years old now, just in the middle now. The Florida forest has overtaken them. It's incredible. And this is the canal. Again, looking towards the Gulf of Mexico, this basically unused canal. This is in the front here, US 19, okay, from Crystal River north, Crystal River south, all the way up here to the Panhandle. And this is what the river would have looked like if not for the activities of Marjorie Harris Carr and her band of environmental activists in the Florida Defenders of the Environment. This picture was taken by me on the river in 2019. And we have this beautiful canopied river like this today because of the activities of people like Marjorie Harris Carr and her fellow activists in the Florida Defenders of the Environment. So thank you.
Wow, what an incredible, incredible presentation. I can't thank you enough for joining us tonight. We had 230 people in attendance, and I can guarantee you that if we were face-to-face in the library right now, all of them would be standing up and applauding. Just what a neat story. You know, in my part of Florida here in the Treasure Coast, we have to deal with the other cross Florida canal, the Okeechobee waterway, and the horrific environmental consequences that have come from it. I would argue that most of the people watching tonight didn't know much about the story of the Cross Florida Barge Canal. And thankfully, we've got a better outcome. We do have a couple of minutes for questions. We already have some questions streaming in. If any of you have questions, go ahead and type them into the Q&A box, and we will try to work through them here over the next couple of minutes. The first question we have, if the canal itself is no longer being used, why isn't more water entering the Ocklawaha River below the dam?
Isn't more water entering below the dam? Because
you mentioned that 70% of
because
the water
most of
it
because it's not utilized. The canal is not being utilized, but the canal is there, so most of the water goes to that direction. So even though it's not, and that makes it even worse, it's not. The lock is open 2 days a week for like 3 hours, so you can go from the St. John's to the reservoir and the river 2 days a week, but it's basically unused. So it's the assumption is when the dam comes down, they're going to plug that.
We have several people asking where Governor Ron DeSantis stands on the removal of the dam.
All right, so let's go back. Up until Rick Scott, all Florida governors from the 1970s until Scott were in favor of the dam's removal. and that's Republicans and Democrats. Scott had no opinion. Scott did not do any, I mean, he didn't come out in favor of but no opinion is allowing the dam to stay. DeSantis has not said anything about the dam. And his latest budget has significant money in it for Everglades restoration. But as I'm sure next week, Bob Knight will tell you, not near as much for springs and spring restoration. So DeSantis does not appear to have an opinion. When he came into office, FDE was pretty optimistic about the fact that he would be on their side, but he appears not to have taken a stand on this. And certainly with COVID, this is a back burner issue at the moment.
Great. So you mentioned that the original canal plans did not include the use of dams and locks.
That's correct.
How did they plan on getting water from one coast to the other when the Florida peninsula itself does have a little bit of a ridge?
I mean, so it was going to be 40 feet deep, and if Florida at its height in Southwest Marion County is 80 feet, it would have been 80 feet plus 40 feet down. So, you know, you're digging down to that level. So if you walk, let me go back here. If you walk on this land bridge and you go maybe 3 or 4 miles here, there will be still spoil hills where this place was going to be dug. So there would have been hills there where the canal would have been, you know, so it's just been an amazing, it would have been an amazing engineering feat. So and again, it was just going to be this cut crazy. And people thought, I mean, there are great letters to the editor. What's going to happen to Florida when it's no longer connected? Will it float away? So, yeah.
So during your talk, you mentioned efforts to mine phosphate in kind of that area west of the Barge Canal. Do you know anything about the history of the DuPonts getting involved with phosphate mining in the Sanibel and Captiva area, or the processing of phosphate? I guess was curious about the history of that, the timeline, and when
certainly,
that started to happen.
So by the 1920s, much of the land around Denellen had been mined out, and the phosphate industry moved further south into Polk County in what's called Bone Valley, the Peace River, areas around Mulberry and there. And that still remains the center of Florida phosphate mining today with Mosaic. And so from pretty much the 1930s on, the center of Florida phosphate mining is going to be there. And that phosphate is going to be processed and then shipped out through Tampa and through Fort Myers.
You mentioned that economists felt that this was not going to be a lucrative project. It wasn't going to be well utilized, yet it still went forward for a pretty long period of time. We've seen similar patterns with like the deepening and widening of the Port of Miami. And we have some questions about the Panama Canal and the Port of Miami. And,
right.
And ultimately, even though most people felt that the Port of Miami wasn't the ideal commerce port in Florida, it still went forward. Why do you think this keeps happening? Why do we have these projects that most people understand aren't the best projects from an economic perspective? Why do they happen?
I think certainly economists who favor this are going to be utilized. So there are economists used by the Army Corps of Engineers who say this would work. And I think there are economists who say, deepening and widening the Port of Miami, deepening and widening the Port of Fort Lauderdale, deepening and widening the Port of Jacksonville is going to be beneficial to the state. And I think the key here is this is about, and I think the title of the book is really important here, Across Florida Barge Canal and the Struggle for Florida's Future. What will Florida's future look like? And the assumption is, if you say, I don't want the Port of Miami to be dredged, you are opposed to progress. You are the person who will prevent your grandchild from having a good future. You'll be the person who will prevent your grandchild from having a good job. So it's all, it's about the battle over what Florida will look like. You are that tree hugging environmentalist. And so I think that's why the key to understanding how to get rid of the dam and how to prevent, environmental damage is not the environmental argument, because people aren't going to listen to the environmental argument. They're going to listen to the economic argument. And if you can convince people that economically it doesn't make sense, they will listen to that much more than they will listen to, oh, let's go out there and take pictures of this. I think that's a key to understanding that.
So we've got time for maybe one or two more questions before we wrap up.
Sure.
One of our guests has a question about the area where the canal was slated to run into the Gulf of Mexico. They noticed that there appear to be a series of shoals that extend out into the Gulf. They're wondering if that's a residual from the project.
Yes, it is. And many of the, there are spoil islands out in the Gulf of Mexico there that, again, irony of ironies, that are wonderful sanctuaries for birds. And yes, those are the residue of the canal building in the 30s. Yes. So that, and again, that this is why stuff like this is so complicated.
And then our last question makes me think of the channelization and the draining of the Kissimmee River in the Kissimmee Valley. Mm-hmm. So our viewer wonders, when the dam was built and the river was redirected, were there any areas that dried out? And if so, who became the owner of that newly dried out land? Okay, all right,
there's a bunch of things that this question goes into. One question about the Kissimmee. The people opposed to having the dam removed maintain that, all this land which will be drained, right, will be this muck, disgusting, horrible land for dozens of years. But that argument was made when the Kissimmee was fixed in the last decade. And the assumptions that have amazed even the most avid environmentalists is how quickly nature has recovered and restored that area. So I think that's important. The second thing that I think is important about this is that much of the land around where the reservoir is in public domain. The Ocklawaha National Forest surrounds much of that. So, and that's a question, whose jurisdiction is this? Is it the U.S. Forest Service? So there's not that opportunity on that side to concern about property rights as nearly as much as on the west side of Lake Rousseau, which is with Lakuchi, which has property owners on surrounding the lake. So I think because it's in public land, that's at some level a moot point.
Fantastic. Well, Steve, I want to thank you again for just an incredible lecture. We will have a recording of this posted on our website. If any of you in the audience would like to share it with your friends, I want to thank our audience again tonight. What a phenomenal turnout week after week. And then I want to remind everybody, we have 3 more lectures left. A week from tonight, we're going to learn all about Florida Springs. 2 weeks from tonight, we're going to talk about Sawfish. And then 3 weeks from tonight, to wrap up our lecture series, we're going to have a phenomenal talk by a veterinarian / PhD scientist who studies the health of marine mammals and sea turtles and other charismatic creatures that live in our local waterways. So we're going to wrap up with a strong set of 3 lectures. And I hope to see all of you at all 3. Again, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Steve, and have a great night.
One more thing, if people are interested, they can buy the book on Amazon. So
buy the book on Amazon. I guarantee you it's a much bigger story than we got to hear tonight. So enjoy.
Thank you. Much appreciated. Appreciate what you guys do. And thank you, everybody, for coming. We will get past this. And next time I talk there, I'd love to come to Stewart. So thank you.
Take care, everybody. Thanks again.
Thank you.